It was autumn 1971, and as a young man, just turned 23 years of age, I was living in a tiny wooden cabin on the shores of Lake Rautaperajärvi in the far northeastern corner of Finnish Lapland, a few months into my doctoral fieldwork with the Skolt Sámi people. The Skolts, a tiny minority among the Sámi, numbering only a few hundred souls, had been resettled in this remote area following the loss of their homeland to the then Soviet Union in the aftermath of the Second World War. At the time of my fieldwork, they drew a rather precarious livelihood from a mixture of reindeer herding, fishing, berry gathering, and occasional wage labour, supplemented for many by pensions and unemployment benefit. My plan had been to study the micropolitics of their situation as a minority within a minority. But I quickly discovered that for the people themselves, this took second place to the much more pressing concerns with how to get by from one day to the next within an unpromising environment. And nothing bothered people more, I found, than an issue around reindeer pastures. And this is where the real politics lay. Reindeer herding in Finnish Lapland, which is open to people of both Finnish and Sámi heritage, is organised according to a division into associations. The system had in fact been introduced in the 18th and 19th centuries by Finnish settlers as a way to combine reindeer herding with the annual round of agricultural tasks. Though the Sámi were required by law to conform to it, in practice their traditional kin-based system of herding had continued much as before. Pastures, however, were divided between associations in a mosaic of territories that covered the whole of Lapland. The majority of Skolts were assigned to a territory, one of the largest in Lapland, that had already accommodated the herds of their newfound Sámi neighbours for generations. Perhaps it's no wonder that the influx bred a degree of resentment, bordering on open hostility, only compounded by the fact that the pastures themselves had become so badly overgrazed that the herds were proving difficult to control. Matters came to a head in 1969, just a couple of years before I arrived, leading to the division of the territory into two. The larger portion to the south and west remained with the old established Sámi families, some of which were quite wealthy. The smaller portion to the north and east devolved to the Skolts. This division did not end the conflict, however. If anything, it made matters worse. For the herds themselves continued to roam, as they always did, between the highland tundra in the north and lowland forest in the south. The Skolts were convinced that their own relatively small herds, having mixed with the larger herds of their Sámi neighbours, were being systematically abducted. The only solution, they insisted, would be to build a fence along the new border. Not surprisingly, the proposal to do so met with fierce resistance from the region's original inhabitants. And it was precisely this issue that I found myself discussing one day with my own closest neighbour in the field, Piera Porsanger, whose little cottage lay just up the road, a few hundred metres from my cabin. At the time, Piera would have been around 48 years old, thus some 25 years older than I. He was not himself a Skolt, but of mountain Sámi heritage, and had many relatives among the old herding families of the region. But he had grown up on the shores of Rautaperajärvi and had found his future wife from one of the Skolt families to have been relocated nearby. His loyalties therefore went both ways. Piera was a real philosopher. He was short, thin, wiry, myopic, and wore thick spectacles. But what a brilliant mind he had. He was just immensely curious about everything. He was also multilingual, speaking 5 languages fluently: Finnish, Norwegian, and 3 kinds of Sámi. But he was a hopeless reindeer herder, and over the years had managed to lose most of his animals. His large family was therefore very poor. His ebullient and irrepressibly gossipy wife, Marena, had borne him no fewer than 10 children, ranging in age from a 2-year-old to late teens. They were hyper-intelligent children, always around at my place, ever inquisitive and asking about things. Another frequent visitor throughout the winter months was their ageing pet reindeer, Enoki, who used to come round every morning at 11 o'clock sharp to take a lick from the patch of ice beside my cabin, where it was my habit to take a pee. On that day I was sitting with Pierre in his cottage, and we were talking about the problem of the reindeer fence. He had wisely taught me that in questions like this, it is matters, not men, that come into conflict. Not just among the Skolts, but among Sámi people generally, actual physical violence towards others is regarded as an abomination. Of any group of kin, the worst accusation anyone can make is that they fight among themselves, with fists or even knives, rather than words. In this, the Sámi are keen to distinguish themselves from Finns, who are notorious for both fist and knife fights. But Pierre, considering the matter of the fence, promptly saw it from the perspective neither of the Skolts nor of his mountain Sámi relatives. Rather, he put himself in the shoes, or rather the hooves, of a reindeer. Imagine the fence has been built. This reindeer is following his usual route from the tundra to the woods and finds the fence cutting right across his path. And he says to himself, "Where the devil do I go from here?" The animal, stymied by the machinations of men, is left bewildered. And this question, "Where the devil do I go from here?" has stayed with me ever since. It seems to capture in a nutshell what it is about life for any creature, human or non-human, that makes it all so perplexing. How can we carry on? How can we find a way through when at every turn new obstacles are placed in our path? 8 years later, I would quote Pierre's words as the last line of my book, Hunters, Pastoralists and Ranchers. Where now, I wondered, as I laid down my pen. The book was published in 1980, but it was not until 1996, some 25 years after I first came to know him, that I would see Pierre again. I was on a brief visit back to my old fieldwork haunts. By then, Marena had passed away, and the children had left home. I found him sitting in a neighbour's house, reading the newspaper. He scarcely lifted his eyes from the page as I entered. "I knew you would come," he muttered. That was the last time I saw him.